All right. Well, welcome everyone. So glad to see folks here. For those of you who haven't met me before, my name's Zach Sadiq. I'm the Disability Systems Navigation Coordinator at the ARC, and I'm a autistic social worker and just a strong believer in making sure that people with disabilities have we have our voices included in all sorts of matters, places, and settings that have a direct impact on our lives. And very thankful that Ramona and Rachel have invited us to here to, talk a lot about like what does disability mean? How does the way our disabilities show up in the world impact how we get treated by those without disabilities? And knowing everyone in the room will probably end up talking about many other things as well. And I'm very excited for it. And I'm yeah, lucky I'm not here alone. I've got two shall we say suspicious people here co-presenting with me. And I'm wondering if one of them wants to introduce themselves next. Eric, you're unmuted, so that
Yeah.
naturally means you volunteered.
Okay, thanks. My name is Eric Mathis. Hello. I'm the Community Advocacy Coordinator at the ARC, and it's a great team, and I enjoy being there, and my pronouns is he, him, and I love being a part of the ARC of King County.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. And Di, who are you?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I'll go next. So hi everybody, I'm Di Sammy. I work here at the Arc King County as the Information and Resource Coordinator. I've been here now for like a couple of years now, and I enjoy working with people with IDD, or which is short for intellectual and developmental disabilities, as well as their families and providers. I'm excited to spend time with you all and to see how this helps you all, hopefully. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Di. I would love to also hear from the folks in the audience, like who you are, and what your connection to the disability is, and if you've got any questions you want us to answer as we go through this presentation. So you're welcome either to type it in chat or unmute yourself and share. So I'll wait a moment.
Hey, Zach.
Mhm.
If it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and do the welcome poll, which basically asks people what their role is. We can go ahead and do that
Okay.
now.
Yeah, we can do that now as well.
Yeah, okay.
Good to know there's a poll for that.
All right. Do we all see it?
I see it.
Awesome.
Excellent. We've got a non-attorney special education advocate. We've got Rachel, who's a parent of a autistic young adult and worked here at the ARC for almost 10 years. Yeah, God, it has been that long, hasn't it? Cool. Well, thank you all so much for your introductions, and I'll read them out as we get them in. Okay, I am going to hit the magic buttons that should allow me to share the PowerPoint. I'm doing that right now. Can you all see the screen? Great. Okay. Also going to pin the presenters, so I think you will be able to see us when we're talking in the recording as well, if I understand Zoom well enough. Okay, cool. So okay, yeah, we just did that already. That's great. And Ramona or Rachel, I think one of you is gonna talk about this.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Ramona Hattendorf. I'm the Director of Public Policy at the ARC of King County. Rachel and I, Rachel, you want to say hi?
The silence means probably not.
Probably not. Oh, there we go. Yeah, she waved. She says hi. All right. She's the Director of Information and Family Support. So we're working and helping coordinate actually 3 series of workshops. And all this is done through something called the Inclusionary Practices Technical Assistance Network, which is quite a mouthful. And this is an ongoing project of our state Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. And so they have this ongoing multi-year technical assistance trying to make sure that all students can have an inclusive education. And really specifically this year, they're targeting our people, intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we're really happy to partner with them. As I said, OSBI is coordinating this. They're working with an entity called West Ed, and then they have excuse me, not communication. They have education partners across Washington State, and we're one of those. We're part of the Family Engagement Collaborative, and the Family Engagement Collaborative is part of the Inclusionary Practices Technical Network, and we're on that collaborative along with PAVE, Roots of Inclusion, and Education Northwest. So this one is on, actually, technically, I should have done the slides. This one is part of the Understanding Disability series. We're also doing an Insights on Supporting Families and Navigating Schools. So all of these will be recorded. And if you want to register after the fact, that's totally fine. I will be checking our registrations, and I can send you out materials after the fact. So welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ramona. Awesome. And oh yeah, the Arc of King County. Which one about? Oh, Di, you were gonna share about the Arc, right?
Yes, I was. Okay. Yeah, so hi everybody. So this is just some information on who we are here at the Arc of King County. We're pretty much a nonprofit organization that's been around for more than 80 years. And we focus on supporting the lives and rights of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Um, we have a bunch of different departments here, including our advocacy department, which Ramona and Eric are part of. We have our information and family support department, which I and Zach are under, supported living, and a bunch of other programs. But I can speak on like what I do here at the Arc King County, or what information and family support does. We help a lot of people with IDD with navigating SSI, which is a big thing right now with all the changes going on there, housing, DDA, pretty much any social services or benefits programs that are meant to help this population, right? And on our slide, it shows, do we not have the address for our office? Is it on the next slide?
I mean, it's gonna change within the next couple of months, so you know.
Oh, right, right. I should speak to that. Yeah, so we're also in the process. So right now our main office is in Renton, but we're in the process of moving permanently into our new one that's going to be pretty much right next to the Angle Lake Light Rail Station for the Green Line. And that's opening up in July, I believe. I'm not sure if anybody else knows. July, somewhere there. Does anybody want to add anything about our organization?
Yeah, we're also able to do trainings like
Okay.
this for free to nonprofits or governmental entities who serve people in King County. Doesn't matter how many people, just if you serve at least one person in King County, we can do trainings like this for free for y'all. So feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, and the quick thing I'll add too is so for if you know of families or you yourself are a non-English speaker or like speak another main language that's not English, we do have interpreters available through our language line that we use when we talk to families and try to communicate with them. So just wanted to point that out there.
Yeah, great point, Di. And we also have staff who are able to speak
Mhm.
Spanish fluently, and we do have staff who can communicate and email in Korean as well. So yeah,
Mhm.
can do that. Awesome. And I also wanted to highlight the folks who have also introduced themselves in chat. We've got a parent of two teens who's also an executive functioning coach, is someone who also has ADHD. I don't know what that means. We've got awesome someone from the Kittitas County Developmental Disabilities Advisory Committee, and from a family filled with neurodiversity. Excellent. Those are the best kind of families. And we have Ramona, who's also been working at the ARC 9 years and is the mom of two young adults, one of whom is autistic. Great, awesome. So as we're, oh yeah, Di, you want to cover this one as well?
Yeah, sure, I can cover this. So these are our community agreements that us as a team we have created to make sure that the space we share here feels both a safe space and also a space for learning for all of us. So the first community agreement we have is to please use I statements. So what's meant by that is to speak on your own lived experiences instead of speaking for the experiences of others or overgeneralizing others' experiences. The second one is together we know a lot. So for this point, this is about we don't expect any of you to be perfect or to know everything about anything, but as long as you stay open to learning from others and listening to others, that's what we encourage so that we can all continue learning from each other. The third one is to respect confidentiality. So if anybody shares any personal or vulnerable stories that includes their names, locations, other identifiers, please keep it in the space and don't share that outside of the space. Feel free to share what you learn, definitely, with your communities or people you work with. We definitely do want that to happen, but just not any personal identifiers from people sharing their own personal stories and experiences. And the last one is to please take care of yourself, take care of your needs. You don't have to have your video camera on. You can feel free to take your break or stretch or whatever you need to do at any time. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Anybody that my team wants to add?
Yeah, we also just want this to be as interactive as presentation as we can possibly make it. I'm sure y'all have already spent like at least 8 hours sitting and listening to people talk at a screen. So please feel free to let us know if you've got questions as well. Either type it in chat or raise your hand using the reaction tab, and then we will, we'd love to talk about things that are relevant to the contexts that y'all are living and working in as well. Cool. All right. So today we're going to start off by talking about the history of the disability civil rights movement and why it exists, and also the creation of the disability justice movement. We're going to talk a lot about like what are the different kinds of disabilities that exist out there, and how do those different forms impact how those of us with disabilities might get treated by those without disabilities. We're going to talk a little about respectful language and how to know what words we should use when describing all the disabled people, or specially abled, or differently abled, or exceptionally abled, or whatever term we're using, people out there. And then we're going to end with the models of disability, which is just taking a zoomed out societal sort of like approach on just thinking about, yeah, how do the thoughts we have about people with disabilities, how do they impact our lives? Where do those thoughts come from? And ultimately, how does that impact success, what we view as success for people with disabilities? And knowing us, we'll probably talk about dozens of other things as well. All right, well, with all that being said, let's get started. So early on, the disability civil rights movement, as we know it, formed in. Oh wait, sorry, Eric, you're covering this one. Yeah, that's
You're
right.
doing
Take it
very
away.
good at that. So if you want to continue, it's
Oh no,
fine.
go on, Eric.
Okay, it's all good. Well, as you know, the disability rights and our civil rights is um basically civil rights are important to the Arlington County, and we support that. Um, where you see Martin Luther King Jr. led a lot of people with lived experience to be strong advocates and drive in a rally. But nowadays, in this it's a in the disability community, we are like the second Martin Luther King Jr. leading the parade of civil rights and reminding people that we are people and our disabilities are secondary, and we respect everyone, doesn't matter what size or shapes or whatever we are. It's basically we do what we can to protect ourselves and each other in the civil rights department there, and that's what I strongly believe in. I'm sure that the ARC does too. Did I miss anything?
No, I don't think so. I think I'll add a few things if that's okay.
Cool.
So yeah, like Eric said, civil rights is something that impacts really everyone. No matter your race, ethnicity, creed, disability, religion, et cetera, et cetera. And oftentimes, when we say civil rights, like Eric said, we do often think about, Martin Luther King Jr.'s, like marches on like Birmingham or on Washington, D.C. And, you know, there's definitely so much to learn there. And there have been a similar movement for people with disabilities as well. Um, the disability rights movement as we know it formed, I think it was the late 1960s, uh, amongst parents who had children living in institutions. As we'll talk about a little later on, those institutions were really dangerous and abusive places to live. And those parents, really started to advocate for recognition about, the harms those institutions were doing and creating more community-based support services. At the same time, there was sort of like a second sort of like formation of the disability rights movement in cities like Denver and Chicago, primarily led by people with physical disabilities, because back then those cities' public transit systems were not accessible to people with physical disabilities. They didn't have the like automatic, wheelchair ramps, or even things like elevators that we take for granted today. And so activists across those cities, protested and, you know, essentially advocated for those systems to be physically accessible. And like this is a pretty big deal because back then like the Americans with Disabilities Act um wasn't created, so we didn't have things like curb cuts. It meant that people were very dependent on others if they had physical disabilities to get around. If you weren't wealthy enough to, A, be in a wheelchair and afford I forgot how much those vans were. I think they were like close to 100,000 to be specially modified to allow someone with in a wheelchair to drive them, which even today is a very significant chunk of change. So it meant that people who either didn't have family members to drive them around or um, couldn't drive themselves around were usually isolated at home or living in like a nursing home or institution. And even though like there weren't laws, specifically preventing people with disabilities from, accessing the world and accessing society, there were still a lot of like societal practices that stopped that from happening. Probably the event that the disability rights movement is most known for is the 504 sit-ins. And I'm curious if anyone here in the audience has heard of the 504 sit-ins. You can raise your hand or type in chat. Okay, we got one no. And that's okay. It's not something too many folks have heard of usually. If any of you have seen the movie Crip Camp, it does a really sort of like great overview of
Yes.
folks like Judy Human, who's the woman in the white shirt on the left side of the image. She was a very strong force. And what happened with the 504 sit-ins was that I believe this was back in the Nixon administration. Nixon signed into law the 504 Act, which essentially required federal buildings and federal governmental programs to be accessible to people with disabilities, especially from sort of like, a physical accessibility side of things. And the Secretary of Housing, Education, and Welfare refused to implement the 504 laws, which was a pretty big deal because, like, housing, education, and welfare controlled things like Social Security, controlled things like, Medicaid. And they were also essentially responsible for like managing all of those federal buildings. So if you couldn't access those buildings, if you couldn't like access like appointments for like Medicaid or like, Social Security or other like life sustaining benefits. It's just another very significant barrier that would prevent you from accessing society. So what ended up happening was that activists across 30 or so different cities occupied their local federal buildings. The one in San Francisco was occupied the longest for, I believe, 28 straight days, which today, even today, is still the longest occupation of a federal building. And it, you know, the folks doing this essentially put their lives on the line. They had very complex disabilities. If you can, see like this person, I think back over, oh, you can't see the laser pointer just yet. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Hold on. Okay, let me try this again. Oh, weird. Okay, there it is. This is good. Sorry. So like this person back over here, I think they have like an oxygen bottle. You can see this person here has, you know, um, a medical device on them as well. So like these people had very like significant care needs and were also like doing this like direct action. So it meant like there was a lot of planning that had to go into place in order to make sure these folks could do the activism work they were doing. And eventually they did get their demands met. The Secretary of Housing, Education, and Welfare agreed to implement the 504 laws. And like this was a big victory. And it wouldn't have been possible without the efforts of these activists, their caregivers and supporters, and other like local organizations like unions, churches, local politicians, journalists, and the Black Panthers. And I bring up the Black Panthers specifically because, like, they were instrumental in making sure that people with the folks doing the protesting had access to food and water, which was like absolutely critical. And the main critique of the disability rights movement has been that it only takes a single issue focus. It only looks at disability rights through the lens of disability. And I'm curious if anyone in the audience, maybe knows like why that could potentially be seen as problematic. And you can either raise your hand or type it in chat. I'll wait just a few more seconds. I know y'all are probably eating dinner. All right. Di or Eric, can you think of why that might be problematic potentially?
Did you want to take it, Eric? Sorry, I kind of like zoned out. And I don't know if I can answer well.
Right, I'll do my best anyway, but I think they definitely made victory, but um with the norms and things that they've been called, and they really, really, I guess, in their lives they experienced challenges. Um, but as activists, they really stood still, and even maybe not in this picture, but they actually crawled on the Capitol steps in Washington, D.C. or something to actually pass a law into doing that. And when people saw that, they got walked over, they got walked on, they got made fun of. Um, all of that was very real at the time, and it was. And they did what they did, and the
Mhm.
ADA happened in 1990, I
Yep,
believe, if I'm
1990.
correct. And then we got our curb cuts, things that
Mhm,
we've been advocating for such a long time.
mhm.
That movie Crip Cramp is reminds me why I work in the field of advocacy and encouraging people to do what they want to do, and they could be able to do it by believing in the right,
Mhm.
by believing not just in themselves, but believing with the same cause for the for good reasons and wanting
Sure.
to be there and be strong
Yeah.
and
Well,
fit
and I think,
into that.
Eric, you were kind of getting at part of the answer, like you were talking about the the what did we call it? The capital crawl.
Yeah,
A lot of and a lot of the efforts of this disability rights movement really focused on, like institutional advocacy, like legal advocacy, within like structures that, in addition to being ableist, were also like very, like racist and, sexist as well, on top of many other things. And, the problem with like taking a single issue focus is that, while you might have some success for like people with disabilities, it's an uneven success, and it often means that, it doesn't do much to remove the like racism or sexism as well. So yeah, I liked where you were going there for sure. So what ended up happening was, in the early 2000s, the disability justice movement really started to form in a lot of different places. And one specific group associated with the disability justice movement, called Sins Invalid, which was a performance group of disabled artists over in San Francisco, um, created these 10 principles of disability justice. Activists like, what was it, Stacy Milgram, Leroy Moore, Di knows all of them.
Yeah, so there's Stacey Milburn, who's passed away, Mia Mingus,
Yeah, Mingus.
and Patty McBurn.
Yeah, Patty Byrne, I think. Yeah, that's
Patty
the other one.
Byrne, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They created these 10 principles of disability justice, which, yeah, for me is probably one of the most impactful and, philosophical like texts that I keep going back to really just think about, how do I make sure I do my activism in the right way? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read these 10 principles and talk a little about what each of them means. And then I'd love to have a group discussion, at the end, just talking about like which of these like really speaks to you in your work or in your life, and maybe a little more about like why do they speak to you. So all right, going to start with a lot of words. So the first is intersectionality, and I think that's really the core of the disability justice movement, and it's why it exists. Like for instance, my experience as a white autistic dude is going to be a lot different than a black autistic woman, for example, both in in terms of like how easy it is for me to get services or to be believed, when I say I'm autistic, or whether my differences as an autistic person is seen as threatening or not. Number two is leadership of the most impacted, and that's really just looking at the fact that those who face the most oppression from these systems, like whether it be government or, medical settings or schools or other places, you know, they're going to have the greatest insight on how does this oppression function? What does it look like? And also in terms of thinking of solutions, like how can we create solutions that are going to have the best change on the most amount of people, not just those who are the least oppressed. And so most leaders, most impacted, at least in the way I think of it, usually refers to folks with like intellectual disabilities or those who are non-speaking. They typically, face the most dehumanization in conversations like this for sure. Number three is anti-capitalist politic. And that one, it generates the most discussion in these conversations for sure. But it's just looking at like society has chosen to value certain bodies and minds over others, usually, you know, usually the bodies and minds of white dudes. And that also goes to like, what kinds of ideas do we see as valuable, who's going to be making the decisions, and essentially like how are we going to structure society, and how are we going to structure disability services. We'll talk a lot more in depth about this one, in the economic model of disability later on. Number 4 is commitment to cross-movement organizing, and that one is just essentially reflecting on the fact that, the oppression is going to impact different groups in much different ways, but they also all come from the same, like, root cause, which is, racism and white supremacy. And, in order to do this work in the right way, we gotta be making sure that we're working with, like, activists, focusing in other areas as well, and that we're essentially not leaving anyone behind. Number 5 is recognizing wholeness, and that one is just really pushing back against the, like, dehumanization that people, especially those with, like, visible disabilities or especially complex disabilities, have. It's recognizing that it's totally possible, to live a good, happy life, even if you have very complex medical needs, and that doesn't make your life worth less living, or that doesn't make you, any less human than someone who might not be disabled or has, less complicated disabilities. Number 6 is sustainability, and that's one I really do appreciate in these times. It's just recognizing that these very oppressive systems were not built in a day. They were built over many, many lifetimes. And it's going to take many lifetimes to undo the harm and either change or create completely new systems that aren't going to perpetuate the harm that's being done right now. Number 7 is commitment to cross-disability solidarity, and that's just recognizing that, like, ableism is going to impact different disability groups in different ways. That some groups may have easier access to society than others when it comes to, like, the different disability groups out there. And we gotta make sure that we're coordinating, our efforts with folks of all kinds of disabilities as well, when thinking of, like, inclusive and accessible solutions for sure. Number 8 is interdependence, and that one is just recognizing that, as human beings, we're all dependent on one another in so many different ways. And oftentimes, when we're talking about disabilities, there's a lot of, like, goals in schools made about, like, increasing our independence, reducing our dependence on others. And while that's not always a bad thing, like, that can absolutely be useful if it leads to um, a world where a person can make more choices and, exist in the community more. There can be sometimes a downside to it. And I think my friend Grant, who's a local non-speaking autistic activist, said it pretty well when he told me, like, independence shouldn't come at the cost of pain. And so, like, if we're expecting, for instance, an autistic person to mask or to exist in very inaccessible places rather than, asking for support from others, or, like, we're expecting, like, people with disabilities to, like, crawl up steps instead of, like, building, like, elevators. It does harm to people with disabilities, and that's, something I'm often thinking of when, like, reading IEP plans and all that. Number 9 is collective access, and that one is really looking at, like, what is the creativity that, like, people with especially complex or disabilities or multiply marginalized identities have to have in order to find belonging and access to the world. Um, how do they form community with one another? How do they exist in ways that, may not normally be what we think of as, forming community or friendships? And how does that flexibility and creativity, like, how can that be used to create a better world for everyone, including people with disabilities? And finally, number 10 is collective liberation. And that's very similar to, like, number 4. It's just recognizing that, we're in this work together and we can't leave anyone behind in this work. And the liberation of one, like, the liberation of all can't happen if we leave anyone behind. So I said a lot of words. My throat is thirsty. I'm gonna take a sip of water. But while I'm doing that, I would love if folks want to, talk about, like, which of these really speaks to you, or if you also have, like, any questions, you can ask them as well. You can do that either by taking yourself off mute and talking or typing in chat, and I will pause for a second and wait for some comments.
Hey, Zach, this is Ramona. So I often look at this list, and some days, different numbers reach out to me. But today, and for this group, um, collective liberation really speaks to me. And it speaks to me especially in the context of this series around inclusive learning and inclusive practices and inclusive schools. Because to get that, everyone has to have a sense of belonging. Everyone has to have a sense of membership. And you can't really get that if you're not really looking at like everyone, if you're still looking like some people are different, or some people are somehow they need to have extra protections around them. It's important to have rights and protections, but at a fundamental level, we all have to feel the sense that we're in this together. We're equal valued. So I would say today collective liberation is important. That's the one that's speaking to me.
Absolutely, Ramona. Yeah, I think that's a very powerful one. And, just in terms of thinking about like who do we leave behind in this work? Like, it absolutely happens. And we need to think about, yeah, how do we not leave those folks behind for sure? So yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. Emma wrote in chat, I was also feeling drawn towards collective liberation and thinking about how it relates to intersectionality. Yeah, Emma, if you want to say more on that, I would love to hear what you were thinking there. I can kind of think of where you were going with that, but I don't want to assume anything. Okay, take your time. Awesome. Michelle, looks like you've raised your hand. Do you want to share while Emma's typing?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, sorry. I missed the typing message.
You're good. You can go.
I can wait. Okay. I was going to speak to collective liberation as well, which also was sticking out to me, along with leadership of the most impacted. I have a mentor that has taught me a lot, and he uses this phrase that says, "What we do together cannot be done alone." And I think it's so beautiful. And it reminds me also of leadership of the most impacted because I know myself, I have so many blind spots, right? And so I feel like we really do need a group of people um, to address um, large problems in our society. It takes us all. It takes us all putting our minds together. And when we have different strengths, that only amplifies what we can do together. So, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I think there's a lot of important things that you said there. It's yeah, it really is a team effort. There's so much more that we can do together rather than apart. And sometimes, yeah, there is a big push for just like independence. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing all that. Emma says in chat, while being different, they also have a lot of crossover in how we look at these issues. Togetherness, collective liberations extends beyond a single issue. It is collective within the specific issue, as well as just togetherness between humans in all walks of life. Yeah, that they're so in some ways like similar to what Michelle was also saying there as well. Yeah, really a lot of great wisdom there. Thank you. Kashif, looks like you've raised your hand.
Yeah, if we have to kind of move on to the next topic, definitely let me know. I'll
Oh, we got
keep it
plenty of
brief.
time.
I guess one thing maybe I'll just take a little bit of a contrarian approach to something. It's not to sort of completely contradict anything about sort of the collective aspects of things. One thing I've found in other sort of, movements, if you will, or for justice or whatever, I think sequencing sometimes and prioritizing really matters because of channelizing energy properly and effectively. It sucks. It hurts me sometimes, like to kind of see very important things take backseat to absolutely existential issues. Similarly, very important things that you should be able to say, um, but not being able to say because that you simply do not have the power to kind of go up against a particular type of system or a particular type of framework. So you have to wait and let somebody else kind of move forward with something else that is honestly trivial, but it kind of keeps moving the dialogue forward. So I've said two different things there. One is essentially prioritizing between important and absolutely existential. Another where you know what's the right thing to do, but you simply don't have the power. Therefore, keep moving some other bizarre issue forward because you have to, because that's the only thing that keeps the dialogue open. I find that that's actually the ugly reality many times. Whereas while we want to make sure that we do everything together, a lot of times the reality is you get played after sequence. So I don't know how folks feel about that.
I mean, I think it gets at a dilemma that definitely exists within activism. And yeah, Ramona said it, it's the reality of public policy. I think it is definitely a reflection of like the oppression and that exists within these systems, and that it forces us to make these choices that, when you're talking about like sequencing, sometimes, maybe we do need to approach it from a like harm reduction standpoint for sure. And then it's also important to make sure, like, if we've had to like compromise our work in some way, or, our work has left some people behind, we got to keep advocating for them. We can't abandon them and move on to other things, as I think so often happens in this work. And I think that's really I think for me, like, that's the key there. Like, if you can get like a small victory, and if you push for too much, you might not get anything at all. Then, sometimes that's what you got to do, as long as it means the work's going to be easier in the future, and there's a greater likelihood that you will be able to reach everyone. But sometimes it's like, where do we draw the line there? Where do we compromise our values up to one point? So yeah, I think it's something I think about every day as well, for sure. Michelle, I'm not sure if you still have your hand raised or not. Oh, you don't? Okay, cool. Then Di.
Yeah, sure. I'll just make this quick. Yeah, I think the principle that I find important for like families, including like parents and caregivers, and through like working with them, is interdependence. Because I know I've worked with a lot of like grandparents, senior caregivers, even parents too. And I've noticed that a lot of them are like alone, like they feel alone. They feel like they don't have like a strong support system or friends they can rely on to help them with navigating raising a child with disability, or balancing working while trying to apply for DDA and guardianship at the same time, or stuff like that. So I feel like interdependence is a really important one for everybody, right? But I think about this a lot in relation to like families and their children, or people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are in their families. I'm gonna share it in the chat, but I can also make sure to maybe email it to Ramona later. But connected to what I'm talking about, I definitely want to highlight, in case y'all don't know, for the parents who don't know, there's something called remote supports, which is like a specific type of program that you can apply to get using a DDA waiver. I think they accept Basic Plus or Core. Essentially, TLDR, or too long didn't read, long story short. Remote supports, I learned, is a really great resource that helps people with disabilities have somebody check in on them, like online. Like they can do scheduled check-in calls, they can do like they provide like 24/7 access supports to like people with disabilities. And I saw when I went to the training for this that like the person with disability who gets remote support, they get like a tablet. And they use that tablet to be able to call or text somebody for support, especially if there's like an emergency, like if somebody's having a seizure, for example. So I have flyers around that I'll share in the chat, and I also make sure to share with Ramona. The person's contact is Peggy DeSally. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, but she was really cool. And she's happy to like meet with anybody, including parents or anybody else, to talk about this DDA remote supports program. So just wanted to share that.
Awesome. Thanks, Di. Um, cool. All right. Do folks have anything else they want to say on this before we jump to the next section? Going once, going twice. All right. Then I'm jumping to the next slide. So I guess now is when we get to talk about the impact of institutions on both historically and currently on people with disabilities. So, early on, these institutions were created as sort of like residential service schools back in, I think it was like the 1880s, 1890s. The idea was that, you know, people with disabilities could not be provided proper support and care by their parents. And, maybe in some ways that was economically true. And so what would happen is that they would be sent to these schools where they could learn to become, model productive citizens who could hold down jobs. And then society would accept them. What ended up happening was that even if they had received education at these schools, society still would not accept them. So these institutions became essentially like warehouses for people with disabilities, where they were just kept out of sight, out of mind, for the comfort of the non-disabled people in the community. And these became really just dangerous, abusive places to live. As you can see at the three photos at the top left of the screen here, um, these are images from a documentary that was created about Willowbrook, which was a institution in, I believe it was New York State. There was a documentary released about the poor care and dangerous circumstances. For instance, you have like 3 or 4 people with disabilities to a single bed. You had about 6 infants sharing the same crib. So as you can imagine, like diseases were rampant. There was very little staff care support. There were a couple of instances, for instance, where like people with complex, motor or like swallowing related disabilities maybe only had enough like staff support to be fed for maybe like 5 minutes a day if they were lucky. And that for the folks like that, that wasn't nearly enough time to get the nutrition they needed. And so a lot of them ended up suffocating to death or dying from malnutrition. And so there was a big outcry against, the inhuman treatment that was happening at these places. And so starting in, I believe it was in the Johnson administration, there was a really big push to create more like alternative community-based services, programs where people with disabilities could live in the community, with their friends, with their family, and also with the idea that like when they aren't like isolated or like segregated in these institutions, then it would be much easier to spot and prevent abuse or harm that's happening, for instance. And the deinstitutionalization like initially started off really well. The federal government really like cared and properly funded it. It created organizations, for instance, like the Arc of King County. I don't think we would exist as the way we do now without the deinstitutionalization movement. And so things went pretty good. Up until the Reagan administration, when the decision was made to move the essentially the onus of deinstitutionalization from the federal government, which had the funding and expertise and technological know-how, to the state governments, at which time none of them had the knowledge or expertise or, in a lot of cases, the political will to do it. And so what ended up happening was that the funding for these community-based services just stopped, they dried up, and a lot of people with disabilities were just kicked right out from institutions, right onto the streets with no connecting support services. And so as a result, um, homelessness really skyrocketed amongst people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. A substantial percentage of people with IDDD are homeless. I think about like in the most recent like one night count in King County where they asked about disability, I think at least 15% of the people who reported being homeless reported having an intellectual or a developmental disability. I think it was around 60% reported having at least like one disability. So it like disability and homelessness is like very intertwined and very connected. And what also ended up happening was like a lot of Black and brown people with disabilities were often had the police called on them for things, essentially like things they would do related to their disabilities. And so now it's led to a circumstance where like jails and prisons are the largest service providers of people with disabilities in the country, rather than institutions. And it's hard to think of if that's better now than what the institutions were like. Maybe it's a little better, but it absolutely should not be the way it is today. And it's a reminder of how cross movement organizing is so important for sure. Um, I think what I also want to talk about is the impacts of things like the Americans with Disabilities Act, and other laws and federal programs. Like things like Medicaid are absolutely critical for people with disabilities to exist in society. Same with, Social Security, supplemental security income. And it feels like those are absolutely at risk for, being reduced or eliminated entirely, both within Washington and within the rest of the country. And it is very likely that this will have dire and deadly impacts on folks with disabilities. It's the last last several months have been very scary. And there's we'll see where we end up in the a year from now or 3.5 years from now. It's something I do worry about. Does anyone else want to add anything to any of this?
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit about what I shared in the chat. So it's this really cool resource I just found online that was shared by Leah Lakshmi Piepsna Samrasina, and she is pretty much like a really cool activist in disability justice, also performer in Sins Invalid. Um, anyway, the link I just shared shows resources that can help autistic people themselves who are self-advocates, but even other people with developmental disabilities and the families of these folks to know how to support them when they are interacting with the cops or if they're experiencing bullying, abuse in the institutions, anything like that. So just want to share it, hoping that it can help you all and your families to navigate those scary situations.
Awesome. Thanks, Ty. Ramona, what about you?
Oh, I have so much to say, but I'll try to limit it. I just want to point out that this one is still very much a part of the current reality. And it's not just the physical institutions that you don't really see the overcrowding. You're not really seeing that anymore. Institutions are much different places now. But we still see this institutional thinking, and that's really the crux between community-based. It's also in the schools, it's the crux between inclusive learning and a segregated, self-contained setting. And it's this idea that, you don't really fit here, so you need to go somewhere else, and we'll make that work for you. And then on top of that, there's a sense that people with really significant needs have to go somewhere else to have those needs met. And in a lot of this work and a lot of this movement has been trying to really change that into thinking that, yes, some people have very significant needs. Some people have more unique needs, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be put somewhere separate. And in fact, we found that when we do put people separate, they don't have, like in the schools, they don't have as much access to different learning, but also, and you spoke to this, it can set up the potential for harm in those segregated settings because there's not as many eyes on them, there's not as many attention put to them. And so this is something we're still facing. And in fact, right now, like you have on this slide that we have 4 residential rehabilitation centers. And right now, we're talking about the state level of maybe closing 2 of those down so that we only have 2 remaining ones. And there's a lot of people who feel that, well, if we do that, then we're shutting off care for people. And it's like there's not enough understanding that, but we have been building up community supports. We do have community residential places. We do have the ability to push in supports for people with the most intense support needs. We don't have to put somebody in this separate place to embrace them and make them part of our community. So I just want to point that out, that this one, it's still very much the fabric of our lives. And it's still, I think I see this really influencing our schools, this institutional thinking, and it leads to self-contained classroom settings and kind of this resistance of like, but they're supposed to be there. That's the best place for them. Even though the research doesn't actually support that.
Di asked in chat, in special education too, question mark.
Okay, so here, special education is not a place. Special education are services, and the services don't necessarily have to happen in a separate place. The services can be pushed into a general education setting. So that's getting to the institutional thinking. Oh, you require special education services, therefore you're in a separate system, you're in a separate funnel, you are off in special education. And that's actually not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that general education is accessible. It's not about just giving access to books and math or whatever. It's about creating an education system that we can all belong to, that we can all gain from, we can all participate in. And it's the same between the education, and then when you get into the community, it's very similar. We don't want separate playgrounds just for people with disabilities. We want communities that build accessible playgrounds. We don't want nursing personal care to only happen in a nursing facility. We want it so that somebody can live in their home and they can get care pushed in if they want, or they can live with roommates if that's what they want to do. It's still with us.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I think Ramona, your point about it's not necessarily like it's both a place and it's also practices as well. I think that's an important one for sure. And I'm just reading the comments in chat. Yeah, definitely really agreeing with what y'all are thinking there. Well, thank you all so much for your thoughts so far. Please keep throwing them our way. We love hearing of them. All right, so as you may have heard before, disability shows up in at least 2 different ways, and Di is going to tell us a little more about what that looks like.
Yeah, sure. I'll talk a little bit about this. So there's a lot of different types of disabilities, but essentially there's folks who have physical disabilities and folks who might have more mental or like intellectual disabilities. So for example, for people with physical disabilities, that can also be developmental disabilities. And this is like, for example, folks who are wheelchair users, folks who have cerebral palsy, and other kinds of like physical disabilities, right? And for these populations, a lot of the struggles that they face in their everyday lives is being infantilized. And we're probably going to get more into this when we get into the models of disability. But that's pretty much when a person with disability gets treated like a kid, right? Like they get treated like they don't know what they're doing or that they can't make decisions for themselves. So that's a struggle with those communities that I would say we have a lot to work towards, of like not perpetuating infantilization towards people with physical disabilities. And because like physical disabilities are more easier to see with our eyes, another name for that is having a visible disability. And that's different from other disabled people who have more mental disabilities or invisible disabilities, because it's not easy to see with our eyes, such as folks who have autism, ADHD, and other types of disabilities that happen more like internally, so either like in our cognition, brain type of stuff. And for those who have invisible disabilities, including a lot of autistic people, the struggles that we face is feeling forced to have to engage in masking to survive and navigate a lot of spaces, institutions that are not inherently welcoming or accepting of us as autistic, disabled people. Um, and we're probably going to get more into like masking as well, but yeah, pretty much masking is like when I'll use myself as an example. Like I've done this when trying to act as non-autistic as possible to survive a work environment in the past. So that's an example of what like masking can look like. Other things to know about disabilities is that they can be temporary or permanent. So examples of like temporary disabilities include like when you sprain your ankle, or when you break a bone from falling out of a tree for some reason. Like those can be repaired or taken care of with clinical care. So those are considered temporary. But then there's disabilities that are like permanent and don't necessarily ever go away, such as autism or cerebral palsy, and I'm sure a countless others as well. But those are some examples of disabilities that don't ever go away. They can't be cured, and we'll talk about more why that is. Um, and then the last thing is that our disabilities often impact us very differently every day. So for example, for me, with my autism, I also have a lot of like sensory sensitivities, including in my hearing. Um, so if I go to like a concert or like a club, for example, for like a long period of time, I'm going to be very tired after that. And I'm not going to want to talk to anybody the next day. I'm just going to want to go straight home and just be in my quiet room away from the world. And I'll be pretty tired from something like that. But if it's like a day where I'm just like in a quiet library, for example, like just hanging out there on my own, that's gonna look very different, and it's not gonna like impact me so negatively as much by the end of the day. So that's just one of many diverse examples out there of how disabilities can show up very differently for those of us in the IDD community. Is there anything that my team would like to add?
No, I think not too much. Often those of us with invisible disabilities have to spend a lot of energy like proving that we do have disabilities to often mistrustful or harmful systems. Like I think Di was talking about workplace accommodations earlier, and it's similar with like special education as well. So I think that's what I'll add for those of us with invisible disabilities. What about you, Eric?
Yeah, I know that I have Down syndrome. I have an intellectual disability. I can, there are people that can handle so much in a day, but sometimes by the end of the day, like this week and the other day, I found out about something that was a bit emotional. Like first thing in the morning, I saw this text message. I read it and it basically gave me tears. I was sad. And I told myself, I'm going to get through my day. Since I had, since I got up and started my work day at 7, when I could have worked a little later, like at 9 o'clock or something, but I plowed through my day and it felt good that I distracted my mind where I wasn't just focusing on a text message that triggered me a bit, and it's still there, but I don't I did what I could do, but I do know people with all different kinds of disabilities take things sometimes a little bit hard. Sometimes you could just easily let something go and not worry about it, but still have a positive mind and get to the day, even though that you have so much. And by the end of the day, I would like to be done with work, but there's like one more meeting I have this evening that maybe I am looking forward to, but I just want to be in a quiet place, like what Di was saying, like in a library or something, and just having that time to, either find yourself or just feel good about what you are doing and what you have done, and probably change someone's mind in a way and feeling good about themselves. And that's one of the best things about having a career or a job that you love so much that you put your passion in. I've been doing this kind of stuff for 15 years at the King County, and yeah, I've seen a lot of changes. Some things come and go, some things don't always, but I'm only one person that is a lived experience person, but I'm not giving up, not until whenever. I'm good.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric.
You
Important
bet.
things there for sure. Also, my cat just wanted to inform management that he wants to submit a letter of protest since I'm working past my normal hours. So just be on the lookout for that, Rachel and Ramona. And if any of you hear like yowling, it's related to that. All right. So one of the most common questions we get is like, what are the ways we should, refer to people with disabilities or talk to people with disabilities? What are the best words we should use? Is it an easy question to answer? And unfortunately, it's not an easy question to answer. It's bit of a complicated one. There's like disability covers like millions of different experiences within the United States, let alone like billions of different experiences in the world. And like since disabilities look much different from person to person, even within this like same disability, that's going to directly impact your life, how you live your life, and how others view your disability, which is then going to directly impact like how you feel about like when it's okay to be taught, when it you know who it's okay being talked with about, and like how it should be talked about. So I have a couple of like hard and fast recommendations when it comes to talking about disabilities. First, if you're talking about a specific person's disability, like use whatever language preferences they have. um you know, Also with regards to like when they're okay with it being talked about, who they're okay with it being shared about. And there's sort of like two sort of like main trains of thought when it comes to uh talking about disabilities, even when talking about a single person's disability. Y'all have probably heard about person first language, and that's essentially like I'd be called a person with autism. The idea with person first language is that disability isn't our sole defining characteristic. There's a lot of other things we bring to the world. And, we shouldn't get stuck on, just one aspect of who we are to be included. And, like typically communities that prefer person first language are like those with like intellectual disabilities or Down syndrome or like cerebral palsy or, like many other disabilities as well. And then you've got identity first. And the idea with identity first is like, yeah, disability really is a defining characteristic of who you are. It's like, it's inseparable, probably, depending on your disability. It's, directly impacts probably your personality, where you choose to spend your time, who you choose to spend your time with, how you look at the world. And we shouldn't have to like, ignore a very salient part of your identity to be accepted, to accept you. And, the communities that prefer identity first, typically the autistic community, and we got that from like the deaf community, and then the blind community as well, typically uses person or identity first. And then, of course, like even within all of these different disability groups, there's going to be different preferences. So, that goes back to, if you're talking about a specific person's disability, use their language preferences when talking about it. If they're younger or maybe like they don't necessarily, their disability impacts their communication, the way they communicate or how easily it is to understand their communication, then that can be a little trickier. Um, but try and ask them if you can anyway, and take whatever they say or don't say into consideration. The second hard and fast recommendation I have is like if you're talking about a collective group of people with the same disability, use that disability group's preference. And when trying to figure out what that preference is, look for sources and articles written directly from that disability community rather than like professionals or parents, because sometimes there could be differing points of view between those three groups. And, the choice of like what word should be used should absolutely be centered on the people with the disabilities. And finally, then we have the slide at the top left. The new R word is respect. So historically, the word retarded was created as a medical term to refer to what we now call people with intellectual disabilities, and it's since turned into a slur that's used to demean the personhood of people who might act differently than what's normally expected. We it's a term I was called many times in high school and middle school, and it never really felt very good. We like to say the new R word is respect. And finally, hold on, where was I going to go with? Oh yeah, finally, the word disabled or disability is not a bad thing. It's not a shameful thing. And there's still a very prominent push, usually from non-disabled people, to try and use euphemisms like the word special in so many cases is used as a euphemism for disabilities like special needs, special education, special Olympics. And I don't think it like it's a term that starts to feel a little patronizing or demeaning over time. Same with like differently abled, exceptionally abled, as you can see at the comic at the bottom left there. Disabled, disability is not a bad thing. When you're talking about like the everyone with a disability, should you use person first or identity first? Like I use both interchangeably. Like there isn't a definitive community preference for that specific terminology. So you can use both, you know, if you want. Dyer, Eric, do you want to add anything to this?
I don't think
Hey,
so. I guess the quick thing I'll add is like, this isn't really seen a lot in a lot of communities, but I know in the more, I guess, disability justice type of like spaces, or cutie BIPOC center spaces too, or queer trans, like indigenous people of color centered spaces. Um, you'll see disabled people like identifying as being chronically ill, like they're like proud of being called that or being known as that. I'm one of those too. But that same term can also be a term that doesn't align with somebody, with another person with a disability. So pretty much, just like Zach said, it's always good to check in with the person or the group of people with disabilities themselves on how they want to be referred. I just set that one out as an example.
Awesome. Thanks, Di. What about you, Eric?
I just mentioned that I think it's important, like for respectful language, like when someone's in a wheelchair and you're looking down at the person and the person is trying to look up and look at you, it's like hurting the person's neck in a wheelchair. So with having respectful language is looking them in the eyes and kind of be at the eye level by kneeling a tiny bit or something, shows a little bit of respect, which is a new R word, is respect. I think that's important, and just if you don't know, like when you see someone with a disability or something like that, you know, why not ask the person first what their preferred way, how they want to and identify themselves in a way, if that helps.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Eric. That does help for sure. Yeah, Di says in chat, nonverbal communication is important too. As an autistic person, I vehemently disagree, but I can respect your perspective there. Good things to be aware of there. Yeah, for sure. Do folks have any questions about language or terminology before I jump to the next slide? Based on the literal nonverbal communication going on here, I'm assuming no, so I will jump slides. So we get to now talk about the models of disability, and they were created by disability study scholars who, over the past 30 or so years, have been reading a lot of books, watching a lot of TV, and getting paid for it by colleges and universities, all so that they can categorize all of the different ways that disabilities are described or thought of in society. And it also means they have to read really boring governmental publications as well. So I guess their jobs aren't exactly that easy. But I know like this slide looks like really like super intimidating and scary and like badly formatted. Like first there's just like so many like words and like no pictures. You've got like big scary words like undesirable, containment, discrimination, broken, or like demeaning. Like, yeah, very, very scary. And it's a lot to take in. So I've got good news. We have broken these slides down into smaller slides along with pictures to go along with the points we're trying to make. But the bad news is that my boss Jay loves showing up randomly and quizzing people on the slides related to the models of disability. So you should probably pay attention if you don't want to fail the pop quiz if she decides to pop in and do that. So the first model of disability we've got is the moral model. And you might say, oh, okay, like moral, like, if someone has strong morals, like that's a good thing. And so that means, the moral model of disability is going to be a good thing, right? Well, in reality, the moral model, if I were to ask it why disability exists, it would tell me that someone is disabled because of a mistake that either they made or maybe a friend of theirs or family member of theirs made, or maybe it was a community member. And it was either in this lifetime, but it could have also been in a past lifetime or could have been like 20 or 30 years ago. So for instance, the fact that Rachel has an autistic son could be because like she ate too much vanilla ice cream while she was pregnant with her son, or maybe it was because she said a mean thing to a kid in third grade. And we know. Oh, yeah, Rachel is taking herself off. Yeah, do you want to deny or confirm that, Rachel?
No, I will fully confirm that. I don't know if I shared this with you or if you've read my mind, but those were absolutely the things. It wasn't vanilla ice cream. I was worried about tuna. I had eaten tuna fish too many times when I was
Wait,
pregnant.
they
And
have tuna ice cream?
no, I probably would have eaten that too.
Okay.
But that's where my mind was when in Nate's early years. I'm ashamed of it now. Or I guess not ashamed because it was just where I was, but I've come a long way since then. I but yeah, I was like, what had I done to deserve this? And as if it first of all, as if it was happening to me and not him, or also as if it was a bad thing.
All right.
So anyway, I just
Exactly.
wanted to reinforce that. Like all joking aside, it really was where my head
Yep.
was.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like I've heard that from so many other like parents and people with disabilities who, became disabled later on in life. It's always like, what did I do to deserve this? And, I think it's totally a natural like human thought. And, it is an important one to move through as well and get support in like processing through that for sure. So like, automatically the fact that like disability see, Jesse says in chat, sometimes priests preach saying that God is punishing you for your forefathers did something wrong. Yeah, and there can definitely be a link between like the moral model of disabilities and religion, because in many cases, like, sins can lead to disabilities in a lot of different sort of like theological scriptures. And it's definitely something that does stigmatize those with disabilities. Ultimately, that's what the impact is going to be. Those of us with disabilities, especially those with visible disabilities, are seen as a sort of like tangible manifestation of that mistake, and it's uncomfortable. And so, oftentimes, what ends up happening is that people with disabilities, like, we're not accepted or included in society, and we're often cast out of society, at best like hidden away in our family homes, at worst just cast out entirely, like exiled, or through lethal or non-lethal means as well. And so it's one of these things where like it's a thought that was very prevalent in the US. We don't see it as often anymore. We still do sometimes see it in like the guilt and shame that like parents of newly diagnosed kids with disabilities will go through. But it's one that's very common, where like disabilities are not very commonly spoken about. The moral model is very synonymous with like the stigma about disabilities, and that's something that we really need to push through that stigma for so everyone can have a better life ultimately. Di, Eric, or anyone else, do you have anything you want to add to this?
One thing I would like to add is I knew a friend that was um to some people they would say that he's a freak, but he was tall, he was a great advocate and all of that, and he got made fun of by saying that person is a freak, so why be his friend? And in a moral model, that's one of the thoughts, is what people are thinking or just saying out loud. Look at that freak, like when you go to a freak show, and this is a real person that I know that is still alive and doing well. But to some people, the outer uh, appearance, when you see someone, that's their assumptions, is that's what they're probably thinking or just saying out loud. What a freak he is, don't talk to him. And I think that fits in a moral model, but
Mhm.
it
Yeah,
is very um hurtful, and it doesn't really support the person at all in any way to make them feel any better about life
for
in a
sure.
way.
Awesome. Thanks there, Eric. I think what I'll
Yeah.
also add from thinking about what you had said, really, we don't get very much support in the moral model, those of us with disabilities. Like, we're just seen as objects of pity or objects of charity. You might give like an alm to like a, blind beggar as you like walk down the street. Like, that's really all the interaction that, or attention or focus that's given to people with disabilities ultimately. So, not a very good model. In terms of like other models that may or may not be good, w- we have the capitalist model. And Di, I know you like ranting about capitalism.
I do. Um, so this model is also a really bad model. Um, and what the capitalist model of disability, what that pretty much argues is that disabilities themselves are a weakness. They are obstacles for that impact a person's ability to be able to work, to be able to be productive, labor-wise, and to be able to help companies to produce profit under capitalism, which is the system that affects all of us. Um, this model doesn't like account for or address how discrimination, ableism, and other historical forms of oppression affect people with disabilities. And it also puts this responsibility of adapting and changing on disabled people themselves and not on society institutions and systems themselves to do better to show up for disabled people. Um, Examples of this that I can think of, especially from like my own lived experience, is unemployment benefits, and how the only way to qualify to continue getting those benefits is that you have to be looking for work. You have to be like actively searching for work. If you're not doing that, they don't give those to you. And that can be a barrier for like, for example, for me, it was pretty hard to do that as somebody who struggles with executive functioning with my autism and ADHD. And I'm sure for other folks with other IDD or intellectual and developmental disabilities, they might experience other types of barriers to be able to consistently be able to be looking for work, right? So that's like an example of the capitalist model of disability and how it affects disabled people. Doesn't really serve them. If anything, it just doesn't really do much to help us with improving the quality of our life. And another example is SSI benefits or disability benefits, right? And how um, those benefits are meant to make us be more productive citizens, right? And yeah, like I think maximum amount, it might even gotten lower, but it's between $800 to $900 that people with disabilities get on SSI per month. And that doesn't really cover anything, right? Like thinking about rent, bills, food, groceries, all of that. Like that doesn't really like it helps a little bit, but not a lot. Like I've met so many clients who are on SSI and who are still struggling with making ends meet and with finding housing. Oh, I saw that Zach put $967 currently. Um, and with like all the changes that are going on right now in the SSI and all these different departments, like that's just adding more complications, more stress, and more barriers to people with disabilities to be able to access SSI, right? Um, Essentially, this model is like really harmful to not just people with disabilities, but honestly all of us, because it doesn't for example, highlight the strengths, gifts, and non-capitalist contributions that people with disabilities do indeed provide for themselves and the rest of us in society. So those are just a little bit of a few things about this model. Feel free to add anything, anybody in our team.
Yeah, I think like what I'll say is, like unlike the moral model, we do get some like menial supports, but it, like Di said, it's only geared towards making us more productive citizens. It's only geared around reducing our economic burden on the economy. And that can allow for some like existence in society for people with disabilities, but like only if we really push ourselves and force ourselves to mask, which, really does come at the cost. Sort of like the mental and emotional cost for those of us with disabilities. So it's not ideal ultimately, for sure. Eric, do you want to add anything?
Sure. At least one thing about one of the thoughts that people with intellectual disabilities or people in general with disabilities may feel like they're being burdened with so many things they're putting on their shoulders and not really saying anything. And in any action, there's like absolutely no support. And that doesn't really help someone to feel good about yourself. So in a way, you're kind of being isolated, and that doesn't feel very good when that happens.
No, it doesn't. I agree. This model does lead to a lot of isolation for people with disabilities as well. And, it, I think for me, the biggest problem, A, is like we're worth so much more than what we produced for the economy. Like as humans, we have hopes, wants, dreams, and goals and desires. And like this model provides no supports for any of that, only if it makes us more productive citizens. And also like, yeah, the only supports we get are, doesn't help improve our leisure skills or anything like that. So what you said there, Eric, made me think of that. And also like, I think also similar to what you and Di had said, you know, we are encouraged to mask or hide our disabilities, and then yes, it does lead to so much like loneliness and isolation for those of us with disabilities as well, and that leads to us not really feeling like authentic, or leads to us not feeling really like human at all, or just that like we're bad humans. So another model, and one that most folks here are familiar with, is the medical model of disability. And I'm curious if folks in chat, I'm assuming most of y'all are probably at least somewhat familiar with the medical model of disability, and I'd love to hear of like maybe some examples y'all run into in your lives or in your work.
Can you repeat that, Zach?
Yeah, what are examples of like the medical model you see in your life or your work?
Mm. I mean, I can definitely share that special education is the medical model, that it is based on the premise that this is where we want everyone to be or how we want everyone to be. This is where you are, and here's what we're going to do to fix it and to get you as close to other people as possible. So to me, it's a really good example of the medical model.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and this is Ramona. I'll add on to that. Excuse me. We often see like, rather than being automatically included and think in terms of like, well, how do we make sure that general education is working for everyone? It'll be like, excuse me, we'll try you over here. And if you can prove yourself, or if we can fix you first, then you can go over there. So we still see this a lot, excuse me, in our schools.
Absolutely, yeah. Um, I think 100% the special education system is a very, very prevalent example of the medical model for sure. Eric, you took yourself off mute.
Yeah. One of the things here where it says push yourself, you can do it. And it says but, and then of course, no excuses. Like sometimes with ourselves, we're like pushing ourselves by saying that we could do it, and someone says no excuses. That doesn't really work very well. When you're pushing yourself so far for things that you're wanting to do, you're gonna get a migraine, I'm sure, when that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Migraines are not fun, and it's something I got from a lot of masking, which really came from the system I grew up in. One which really told me like, since like my autism was so quote unquote like high functioning, like I'd be able to do whatever I wanted to in life, and my autism wouldn't hold me back at all. And I hate the term high functioning for so many reasons.
Right. I agree with you on that.
Totally. Yeah, but it also meant like I could, I just learned to like hide or mask my disability, and I never really learned like what kind of supports I actually needed right up until I was fired from my first two jobs after college. And that sort of like really, radicalized me to become a social worker. And it was just, directly from this thought that like, oh, disability is shameful, your disability is a deficit, so try and hide it as much as you can. And that is the big problem with the medical model. It sees disability as similar to like a disease, a deficit, and it's one of those things where like, and usually in the medical model, like if you've got a disease, like sure, you're gonna want doctors with like fancy degrees and fancy education to like cure and eliminate the presence of those like harmful conditions like COVID or like cancer or like diabetes, um, which like, yeah, those could kill me and harm me if left unchecked. But when it's something like autism or like, Down syndrome or like ADHD or, many other conditions that aren't necessarily gonna like kill you or harm you if left unchecked, maybe a lack of support could like, but that's more on the system than your disability, I think. So it's but still like autism and diseases get conflated so much. Like the International Society of Autism Research is coming up in Seattle in a couple of weeks, and I am just bracing myself for the amount of times I hear autism referred to as a disease. It's gonna be great. And we also see this bus ad at the top right that went around from Seattle Children's Research Institute about 10 years ago, and it says, "Let's wipe out cancer, diabetes, and autism in his lifetime." And there's a picture of a cute smiling child. And just imagine if you're that child and you're autistic and you see like this message getting sent around, the buses. Like it's not a very positive one. It's a very stigmatizing one. You're not going to feel good about who you are. You're going to hide your disability because autism's like cancer, diabetes. Oh no. Yeah. Um, and so like unlike the, you know, moral model and a little differently from the more blah, blah, economic model, the capitalist model. We will get some supports in the medical model, but it's only geared towards reducing the impact of our disabilities on others, you know, through things like making us more independent or appearing less disabled. Really, like success means being indistinguishable from our peers and like sure being able to like pass as non-disabled can be useful in circumstances like job interviews or like, if you're interacting with the police, like, it's a very nuanced, complicated experience, especially for like BIPOC folks with disabilities. But Di was talking about masking a bunch. It's where you're like you're actively and I guess also subconsciously like hiding your disability, the presence of your disability from those around you. That takes a lot of energy. It leads to, if you do it enough, it leads to negative long-term mental health outcomes, especially for autistic folks. And like when the suicide rate in the autistic community is about 8 times greater than the general population, like that's a pretty big deal. And so we really have to look at like how do the expectations we have of people with disabilities and how they show up with their disabilities, like how's that also impacting our mental health? Oftentimes it can lead to a lot of harm in the long run. Um, and so while sure the medical model can be very useful, like if your condition does like bring pain or could substantially lower your life expectancy, then sure, you know, maybe a medical intervention can be useful, but it's not like the be all end all when it comes to disabilities. And, um, it also sees disability only as existing within the person. It doesn't look at like how does the physical or social environment around that person contribute to disabling them as well. And finally, it only sees expertise as existing within those with fancy degrees, fancy education, and fancy letters after their name. And it does not consider the lived experience in designing programs, policies, services, interventions, or deciding like where the funds go, for instance. Lisa in chat. Also, hi Lisa, long time no see. I feel like the last time I saw you was when we did this presentation the last time. My sensory issues and high anxiety got me in a lot of trouble. Dysregulation doesn't just magically go away. Punishments only made it worse and even more exhausting. Special as it's used in this context is essentially a slur. Yeah, pretty much, yeah. God, what was I saying? Yeah, and so oftentimes so much gets missed in like the services available to people with disabilities. And it is so important to have the same types of people that you serve, working as employees as well. We definitely need like special education teachers with disabilities or like psychologists or therapists or doctors with disabilities. And disability is still very stigmatized in those professions, for instance. Anyway, I've said a lot of words. Di or Eric, do you want to add anything to this?
No, you did
Okay.
great.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. Now we're going to go to the social model of disability, which is one of, my favorite and not a bad model at all. And Di's going to tell us a lot more about it. So take it away, Di.
Yeah, so the social model disability is the one that we are hoping that we can all implement in our everyday lives, right? Whether at work, with our families, communities, etc. And pretty much this model affirms that disability is just another diverse identity, just like race is, or gender identity, sexuality, etc., other identities, right? And it also affirms that people with disabilities have unique gifts and strengths that can help them and their communities, right? Like they're not reduced to being seen as a source of labor or being seen as a sin or pretty much anything else in the other models, right? And the social model as well argues that issues related to like inaccessibility or ableism, etc., other oppressive experiences that people with disabilities have, it's not because of disabled people themselves being the problem or needing to change and adapt to non-disabled norms by asking, but it's actually on us as a society and these systems, institutions, etc., that need to work together to be creative and figure out how can we inherently provide support and accommodations for disabled people so that they're not just constantly having to self-advocate for themselves. Because even though that's like a really great skill to have, right, it's also really exhausting for disabled people to have to constantly educate others on how they want to be supported and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, this is a really great model to like work towards practicing even with like your kids and your families, right? I think a example I think of applicable to like parents, caregivers, families, and how they can practice this model while working with their kids is just making sure that you are like listening to your children, right? And that you're letting them like have their voices be centered and all of that. Because personally for me, right, like as somebody who is and always will be disabled and growing up with my family, there's just a lot of times where I felt like my voice wasn't really centered and they made decisions for me, probably unconsciously perpetuating infantilization and all that, which we're going to talk about in the next model, inspirational model. So I just would love to see a world where like parents, caregivers are also hearing out their kids and letting the kids take charge of how they want to make decisions that impact their lives. And obviously, like parents and caregivers should step in for like guidance and advice. Like if, I don't know, their kid is kind of making a decision that might lead them down a scary route, like kind of guiding them right. But I think what I'm thinking more of is just like um resisting what I see in a lot of parents, like the kind of like default tendency to want to do everything for like their kids. Like your kids have to mess up every now and then to learn, right? So anyway, that's all I'll say about that example. I feel like I went off tangent, so I'll let somebody else take the microphone.
No, I think pretty much what you said there was super important. It's, like this is the model we want to see more of in the world. And, it definitely like it takes a community effort to make this happen, like I was saying, we can't just put the burden of change solely on the people with the disabilities to do the work. It has to be on the non-disabled people as well, for sure. Eric, did you want to add anything to this?
Sure. This model I like to be at because I like to see more whatever you call normal, I guess. It makes us think that we want to lower our standards and still have the support for everyone to be able to be at their potential.
For sure. Thanks, Eric. Finally, we've got the inspiration model of disability, and Eric's going to tell us a little more about what it is before we end this presentation.
And yeah, this is interesting. And this person named Stella Young, there is a YouTube thing that I encourage you all to see on your own time when you have a chance. But one of the quotes that I seem to like, basically it says the only disability in life is a bad attitude. The reason that's bullshit is no amount of smiling at a fight of stars has ever made it turn into a ramp. No amount of standing in the middle of a bookshelf and ranting on a positive attitude is going to turn all of those books in a barrel. And what that means to me is, what do I want to say? Putting yourself out there and expecting the expectations of people doesn't feel very good. And some people with the different thoughts, like someone says, "Oh, you're a gift from God," and and really believing that. And the word special, quote, uh, you say that so many times, it's like the new, in a way, the new R word, but it really isn't. But you keep hearing it to the point where it's just annoying and it does hurt people feelings at times. But sometimes some people feel like that death is better than having a disability. And I don't think that is a positive thought there. But sometimes, and I don't always feel this way, but sometimes some people may wishing they never had a disability but wanting to be a human. So it's like you're focusing on something that's there, but you can't take it away from yourself. And so, and being so serious about everything about that and being demanding, it's like you feel like you're a non-human. And there's so many uh, different norms or things that hits you and triggers you and puts you down and that sort of thing. And it just doesn't seem right in a lot of ways. Right or wrong, I don't know. But what I think is that's just my thought around the inspiration porn. Inspiration porn in the disability area rather than the first thing that comes when you hear that word inspiration. You can go, there's like the hidden things that people are thinking, which is not exactly what we're talking about, but we're talking about what we're talking about now, which I think it makes sense. If you want to chime in, Di or Zach, if I'm somewhat on the right track here.
I think you definitely are. Thank you for sharing more. The quick thing I'll just like add, as an example of this, just because I see it all the time in big tech, like in Amazon, Microsoft, and it really bothers me, is this model, this inspirational model of disability. And the way I see it is, yeah, actually one of my tech friends the other day, and he's disabled too, but I think he just has a lot to learn regarding the models of disability, but he said something like, "Oh, like you are more than your disability, or you don't have to define yourself with your disability." And I understand that on the one hand, right? Like for folks who choose to identify as person with disability instead of disabled person, and they want them as a human to be centered or prioritized over their disabilities. But for me, like I think the issue with that saying of like, oh, you're more than your disability or you're not defined by that, is that I feel like that's been used historically a lot, especially by non-disabled people, um, to have us disabled people to work towards being less disabled and to not make it show as much, to not act as disabled, to not have as many needs, to work towards being more able-bodied or non-disabled. And for me, as somebody who's like in the disability community and all that, it's like, no, I want you to see that I'm disabled. I want you to see that I have access needs, supports that I need, so that I can thrive in like your workplace or so that I can navigate to your office or whatever. So that's my whole issue with that saying of like being more than your disability. It just ends up like invisibilizing disability, right? Anyway, I sent the Stella Young TED Talk video that's in the chat to like my tech friends, and I told him, send it to all your tech friends, please. Y'all need to learn this.
Yep. Thanks, Di and Eric. I think what I'll add to this model, well, and also first to like what Di was talking about, I have noticed there does tend to be more of a trend for those with like visible or like more obvious disabilities to prefer like person first or prefer having their disability de-emphasized. And I think I can kind of understand where they're coming from on that when, they're probably dealing with a lot of like patronizing BS constantly from non-disabled folks. And it's also like, it just speaks to the need for, more destigmatization and for disability to not be seen as dehumanizing for sure. I think what I'll also add is like, with the inspiration model, if you watch the Stella Young video, it pretty much just comes down to the idea that like non-disabled people have really like low expectations of what people with disabilities can be capable of. And so it leads to circumstances where like Stella Young's, school wanted to give her a achievement award when she was 11, and called her mom to announce that. And her mom was like, "Oh yeah, that's great. What has she achieved?" And the school wasn't really able to answer that. And Stella said, like my mom's right. Like if they wanted to give me an award for like laying bedded all day and like watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like yeah, I did great at that. But if it's just like because I'm able to like show up to school each day with like wearing clothes and remembering what my name is, like that, it feels a little patronizing. And that's really the sort of main dynamic with the inspiration model of disability we want to move away from is that sort of like patronization and also recognizing that like we're not giving people with disabilities too many chances to like challenge ourselves or exceed or excel, especially if they have like intellectual disabilities or like visible disabilities as well. And, if considering like, is it okay to be inspired by something that someone with a disability does? You can ask yourself, like, would you be inspired if a non-disabled person did the same thing? Like, for instance, there used to be a lot of like Facebook articles or like news stories about like a couple with like Down syndrome who was elected like prom king and queen. And I always thought, it's great that they have that recognition, but I also would wonder, were they friends with anyone who elected them, or were they just in like self-contained classrooms their entire school experience and kept away from the school community? Were they invited to the after parties, or, were they just chaperoned home away from their friends and family? You know, were they
Mm.
were they really included ultimately? And then, about a year ago, I read a news article about a dude with like Down syndrome who ran an Ironman triathlon. And like, yeah, I was absolutely impressed. Like, I couldn't do that. Most people I
I'm
know
so
couldn't do that.
impressed.
Yeah, like whether or not they have Down syndrome. And so, like, yeah, absolutely okay to be inspired in that circumstance. And finally, if you're inspired by the fact that the person with a disability had to overcome a lot of barriers to do the thing, like maybe it's good to have that recognition, but then it's also, you should consider like also it would be useful to use the energy you're spending being inspired by helping us remove those barriers in the first place so that it won't be such a like extraordinary thing that there's like, oh, another disabled social worker out there, or, you know, many other sort of like examples. And really until then, like we're not, disability isn't going to be seen as a valid form of diversity. It's still going to be really stigmatized. And it just comes down to the importance of, um, breaking down that stigma and talking about disability more often, especially in places that have a direct impact on our lives for sure. And so, yeah, that's everything I want to say. Di or Eric, do you want to add anything to this? Di is
Die.
shaking their head no. Eric is you're good, Di, or sorry, Eric.
Yeah, I'll just say that yeah, this inspiration porn, I could say sometime, yeah, as an action that doesn't feel very good is focusing on the non-disabled. and that, I don't know, that doesn't, what do I want to say? I don't know. Excuse me for
You're good.
You're
I
doing
thank
great,
God.
Eric. Take your time.
Yeah.
Thank you. Focusing on something that's a non-disabled, like I know I have a disability. Sometimes I do look at myself where I would just for a moment or maybe 10 minutes of what is it like to be a non without having a disability, like a non-disabled person. What is that really like? I'll never know because my disability is a part of me and I am happy with the disability I have. And I know that does feel good in having that support from actually my coworkers, colleagues, and friends. And I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Eric. Good way to end this. All right, so it's 5:59, which means we have less than 60 seconds before this presentation ends. And I just wanted to thank you all so much for sitting here listening to us for the past 2 hours. And just wanted to see if there's any last minute questions before we go our separate ways.
No questions, but can I just say something, just for the parting thought, perhaps, from an otherwise, I guess, how should I put it, abled person, non-disabled person,
Non-disabled is good, yeah.
non-disabled person, right? I think one of the things, as somebody who's trying to be deliberate about participating in this journey and trying to learn, um, I've got intersectionality for other things, right? Happy to talk about that. But I'm a parent of two teens. I'm also a religious minority, particularly belonging to a religion that is not particularly appreciated right now in this country, and so on and so forth. So, look, I mean, I think one of the things I've learned is to just exercise a lot of grace with people who are at least trying. So I try to simplify for them that, hey, listen, if you're trying, you reached out, right? I'm not going to hold you to a standard which, perhaps intellectually I can understand might have been more accurate or more precise. And I have this conversation all the time with people, again, on sort of my side of intersectionality of other things. Hey, listen, we've got a lot of things going on, but that other person, keep in mind where they are at, right? So I just want to kind of say that because look, I mean, and I don't mean this to be a disrespect or a trivializing comment, particularly at the end of the conversation. But look, in two hours, we can spend this, and there are people who want to deliberately lean into these 2 hours. We also got to make sure that we meet them where they're at. Otherwise, they will stop showing up, right? And that is worse then, because they will be like, I'm frozen. Because if I say this, it's going to come across this way. If I say this, it's going to come across some other wrong way. And I think that's worse. As a person coming from a group that desperately needs allies right now, otherwise we may not be in this country, some of us anyway. I think, and then I won't be participating in this conversation at all. I think, that's one thing I just kind of wanted to throw out there that I think is just really important for us to have that grace as well. And I know you all bring that grace to this conversation as well.
Of course, thank you. Yeah, very, very wise thoughts there for sure. I think, we do definitely need to give folks grace and understand, like, yeah, this is it's a lifetime learning process ultimately. We can't expect everyone to be perfect. And if folks, for me, if I like see folks like genuinely trying and putting the work
Yeah,
in and not like always putting their own sort of like emotional needs above, the need to learn about, the way different groups of people live life and, learning about, how potentially like privilege could impact, those different groups of people, then yeah, I'm usually fine with it. For me, it's a little bit like if they're like in positions of power though, where, they should do the learning and they're just not doing the learning, then, for me, it's much harder to give them grace for
exactly.
sure.
Do
It's a
your own
balance.
homework. That's exactly right. I
Yeah,
completely agree.
totally. Dyer, Eric, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll just add something really quick. Yeah, I really love what you're saying. How do I pronounce your name? The
Oh yeah, it's Kashif.
Kashif? Yeah. Yeah, no, I think the point that you're making about the importance of us giving each other grace when we mess up, right? That is very important, especially right now in like this world we live in where cancel culture is very like prevalent in our society and it's like
Yeah.
further dividing and conquering us. And I have the nuance and I guess like the hot take as a also multiply marginalized person, right? Where it can be hard for people to extend grace to each other. It doesn't make it justified, right? Like I'm not justifying it exactly, but it can be very hard when the other person is doing something that can tap into like a really like scary like trauma response or a really scary trigger that could be rooted in so many different things, right? Um, so I guess like the quick thing I'll say is that I think us as a community, we have a lot to work on when it comes to learning how to communicate with each other, how to build relationships, and how to stay together when possible when conflicts happen.
Yeah.
So it's a whole conversation that we cannot cover in the next minute or so.
I just really appreciate the welcoming space that you provide to everybody. Those of us who are leaning in from a variety of different perspectives, just really appreciate the space.
Thank you for being here, everyone. And I figured Kosh, with the words that you said just now and just before, well appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.